A requirement that many OCI users will face is having to conform to security standards. A commonly accepted standard for Oracle databases and Linux servers is to apply the benchmarks published by the CIS, the Center for Internet Security. The CIS publishes any number of benchmarks for all sorts of environments and products. No one manages to pass all the tests in any of the benchmarks. But if the various components of your environment can get through most of the tests, and the failures are all properly documented and justified, filed as exceptions, you will probably pass your next security audit. The two benchmarks that most DBAs will be interested in are these. First, we have the Database 19c benchmark, whatever version it is, and this release was published in December 2022. It's 274 pages. In total, there are about 100 odd checks. Beginning with recommendations for installation and patching, then parameters for the listener, parameters for the database instance. Then we move on to connection controls, user authentication, privileges, and so on. About 70 checks in all. The other benchmark you're probably going to be looking at, and certainly the one you'll be looking at if you're running on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, is the Linux 7 or Linux 8 benchmark. Now this one is a lot bigger. See here, 745 pages, and there are close to 300 checks. So these checks begin with initial setup, file system configuration. And pretty early on, you get 1.6 mandatory access control. And there we see SELinux. We'll be returning to that shortly. If you can't get through the SELinux section of the benchmark, you're probably not going to get through your audit. Now, how are you going to apply these things? Well, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help. If you look at in Identity and Security, we have a section called Scanning. And within Scanning, we can create vulnerability reports and we can create scanning reports. The vulnerability reports go through CVEs, the CVEs to publish regularly, and the scanning reports can, if you look at creating a scan recipe, when we create a recipe, I'll give it a name, my recipe, it can apply the CIS benchmark. It can automate the applying of that, which is very nice indeed. However, rather annoyingly, if you look at what you can actually scan, enable file scans, and then go to I'll disable the file scans, and then go to create a scan recipe, we can choose to create a target. And the target would typically be your compute nodes. So all compute nodes is in the selected target. I don't have any compute nodes in this target, in this compartment, but if I go to, let's just say, this compartment, and select the instances, we'll see here it's pointing out Web 1, Web 2. Those are two compute instances that exist in this compartment called Shared. Very annoyingly, it does not show you the DB system nodes. Those you have to do manually. I did raise a tar about this, and I don't think there's a technical limitation for why it can't scan DB systems. I think probably they just haven't got round to implementing it yourself. But one way or another, you need to apply the benchmark. When you apply it, right at the beginning, it's going to check, are you running SELinux? One of the first checks in the Linux benchmark is for SELinux. This is something so fundamental that you are not going to be able to justify failing it. In the 21st century, you have to use SELinux. On a compute instance, no problem. See this compute instance here. SELinux is enabled by default in enforcing mode. That's what you want. And an OCI compute instance is doing just that. The problem is with your DB system nodes. This is one that I created earlier today. And there's the bad news. For whatever reason, DB system nodes have SELinux disabled. Now, generally speaking, you don't want to mess about at the OS level on a DB system in case you break the automatic maintenance routine. So how to enable SELinux? You could do it by hand. I wouldn't take the risk. I prefer to do it with the tool, the dbcli administration tool. We have a command called secure DB system. And what this command can do is enable SELinux. It can, in fact, also do more than that. It can enable the Federal Information Processing Standards. It can enable the Security Technical Implementation Guide standards as well. I'm going to do just SELinux for the time being. So dbcli, secure DB system, minus SE. It creates a job. There you see the job has been created there. I can describe the job, dbcli, describe job, minus I, the job identifier. And it's already finished successfully. It only takes a few seconds to enable SELinux. To enable FIPS or STIG does take longer. But just to be sure, SE status. Currently disabled, and that's because I need to reboot. Any changes to SELinux only come into effect after the reboot. That should take just a couple of seconds. So just give it another couple of seconds. And now let's see if we can reconnect. Yep, we're back in. And if we check the SELinux status now, that's what we want to see. It's enabled, and it is in the enforcing node. So that's enabling SELinux on a DB system. Use the dbcli utility. It's a straightforward process, but it does need a reboot. To conclude, when it comes to security and security audits, OCI does have some nice facilities. The vulnerability scan service will check your compliance with CVEs. It can also automatically apply the CIS benchmarks to your compute nodes. Perhaps rather annoyingly, it cannot apply them to your DB system nodes. Those you're going to have to do by hand. Another issue with DB systems, SELinux. SELinux is enabled by default on compute instances, but on a DB system, you have to do it yourself. It's nothing too arduous. You just need to do it.
If you liked this video, please like it and subscribe to our channel.